Let's say I started doing this about 9 months in. And to be clear, at 9 months in, I had not yet closed a single loan. So we're talking full life of struggle and pain and maxed out credit cards, et cetera. What kind of correlated with when I started doing the open houses was also a level of peak desperation that's hard for me to describe. I entered these encounters with a sense of, I need this interaction to lead somewhere positive for me in my business. To the extent that I could call it a business at all at that point. And so I think for me, that kind of combination of desperation and also this, new tactic, if you will, it just became very natural for me to, at the end of me being in the open house, saying, hey, I'd like to get to know you better. I want to try to win your business.
To the Lowdown Mortgage Podcast, the show where we dive deep into the topics that impact the evolving originator. I'm your host, Connor Bartley. Bam! And joining me today is someone who has built his business on one core principle, intentionality. From turning several months of zero production into a thriving referral network to mastering the art of meaningful follow-up, his story is proof that steady, purposeful contact beats busy work anytime. Mark Anderson, welcome to the Lowdown.
Howdy ho, Connor. How are you?
I'm doing great, man. Thanks for joining me. It's a pleasure having you on. We've talked a little bit before getting on this episode, and we've had some really great discussion. Just getting to know you has been, awesome. And we'll just dive right in, man, because I think it's always important to kind of get some context on where someone is coming from. So if you don't mind, just to get things started, help us understand how you got into the mortgage business.
Yeah. So way a long time ago, we're talking about 22 years ago, I had just graduated college with a degree in history. There is not a history factory to go hang my hat at. So I was supposed to go to law school. I decided at the last minute not to, and I found myself working as a bank teller. I'm not even sure how it happened, but I kind of worked my way up at the bank for a little while. And I kept noticing that there were these guys that would roll in really nice cars and fancy watches and good suits. And we all had to wear ties, but they would be rolling in with whatever they wanted to wear. They seemed to come and go as they pleased. And I finally asked, who are these guys? They supposedly work here at the bank, but they seem to do what they want. And somebody told me, those are the mortgage loan officers. They're all commissioned, so they can do whatever they want. So that was kind of the seed that planted. I ended up tapping my personal network a little bit because I wasn't super happy working at the bank. It's hard to make good money and very hard work, by the way. Being a bank teller, be nice to your teller. It's a more difficult job than it looks. So I tapped my personal network and came across a guy who worked at a pretty high level at Washington Mutual. And this is going to date me because Washington Mutual at the time was a massive, market dominator in the mortgage space. And I straight up asked him, I said, look, do I have what it takes to succeed in mortgage? Do you recommend that I go into it? And he said, becoming a mortgage loan officer is the best way to make the most amount of money without risking any of your own. And that was all I needed to hear. He did kind of give me the dad speech about, now you're commission only. And that sounds really great if you're thinking about the ceiling, but you really got to think about the floor. And it kind of turns out the floor is zero.
Yeah, and you shared that some of the, in the beginning, it was really tough for you. You put in a lot of effort, didn't see a lot of return. Can you share a little bit about that and what that was like for you?
Yeah. So I was 21 years old, and what I decided to do was not only was I getting into a new job, but I also moved from Champaign, Illinois to St. Louis, Missouri. So I moved to a place that I knew no one, got in this commission-only job in the middle of the summer 2000, and it was just a struggle from day one. The training program that I got, and I think anybody in our business is going to relate to this, the training protocol was, here's your laptop. Here's some really old books that we found in a coat closet somewhere full of binder organizers. Read this, I guess, and take this laptop and go out and get some loans.
Figure it out.
And I would ask people, and I worked with some really great people, some of whom, gave me really good advice early on. The theme that I got from all the people that I talked to was that to solve the problem of going and getting some loans, you pretty much should just get in your car and start driving around to visit real estate offices. And so I'm a good soldier. That's exactly what I did. And I found my days basically from about 8 in the morning until sometimes 7 or 8 at night. I'm driving around all creation, looking kind of at random for real estate offices. And I found myself more than once just truly driving with no particular direction in mind, just looking for signs. And I'd bop on into the real estate office with I for some reason had this like ridiculously large work bag full of 20 different flyers. I don't know how I imagined this was going to go exactly. I'm going to sit down with somebody, show me all your flyers. I got 20 of them. And you might appreciate this. The first real estate office I remember walking into was the most prominent looking real estate office I could find. It was a massive 4-story, very wide, big commercial building with Coldwell Banker Gundaker at the top. Well, what I later found out is that this was in fact the corporate headquarters of what at the time was like the behemoth in real estate. I walk in the front door with my big old bag and my flyers. I walk up to the front desk. There's kind of a dejected looking receptionist, I thought. And I said, I'm here to meet a realtor. And I'll never forget, this guy puts the phone down. I'm a realtor. What do you want? I don't even remember what I said. I just remember I ended up like turning tail, walking out with my big heavy bag on my shoulder. And I found myself in my car, like not knowing what to do. Like, was this it for me? It completely fell on my face. It didn't work. I still to this day have no idea what I told the guy.
Right.
But let's just say it was not a great start.
Yeah. So, but you found along the way kind of a turning point, right? And I think we talked about open houses and that kind of being the moment in time or the tactic, the strategy that really helped give you a lift. So what was it about open houses that was sort of the game changer?
I think open houses for me, the reason it worked is because it played into what I was bringing to the table as a loan officer. There are guys that do what we do that are really great. They give good phone. They can sit there and cold call 100 names in a day. They'll land 5 to 10 appointments. I'm not that guy. I can't stand receiving a cold call. And I think there's something in my brain that just prevents me from doing it myself. That wasn't going to work for me. The driving around all creation, just bopping into real estate offices, that really wasn't working for me for a bunch of different reasons. One, I don't necessarily know that I was bringing my confident A game to the equation. Again, in that initial interaction, I truly didn't know exactly what I was there to say. And I also noticed when you're in the real estate offices, the realtors are typically there because they're like working, because it turns out they do actually work, contrary to popular belief. And it wasn't a good environment for me to try to engage them on that level with. Well, you go to an open house on a Sunday, half the time they're sitting there bored out of their gourd. You're walking in and they're kind of a captive audience. There's not a lot, there's nothing else going on. They're administering the open house. I just found that I had an opportunity to have the room that I needed to make that good impression. And I could talk to them about the house that they're selling. I could look around and give them kind of my thoughts on the price to the extent that my opinion was useful or accurate, and just kind of jive with them about what they're doing. Also, I think helped me to see them do the work of a realtor. To be a realtor, it's a really hard job. I wouldn't do it. And you do find yourselves often in an empty house alone. And maybe your favorite person to talk to is not a loan officer, but beggars can't be choosers.
Right. Yeah. So a lot of times people talk about open houses. They say the fortune is in the follow-up and what they do after the meeting. I think it's great that you're able to have that captive audience, have that conversation in the moment. But how then were you taking that introduction and turning it into a relationship?
Well, I think there was something that was kind of correlating with this activity. Let's say I started doing this about 9 months in. And to be clear, at 9 months in, I had not yet closed a single loan. So we're talking full life of struggle and pain and maxed out credit cards, et cetera. What kind of correlated with when I started doing the open houses was also a level of peak desperation that's hard for me to describe. I entered these encounters with a sense of need. I need this interaction to lead somewhere positive for me in my business, to the extent that I could call it a business at all at that point. And so I think for me, that kind of combination of desperation and also this new tactic, if you will, it just became very natural for me to, at the end of me being in the open house, saying, hey, I'd like to get to know you better. I want to try to win your business. I kind of walked into the asking for a business thing without having come across it in any of the books that I had read. It's like classic sales 101 advice, but I just found myself naturally able to ask for the business because I had no other option.
Right. And you mentioned something to me that I thought was really smart, which is, even still today, when you're reaching out to your referral partners, you're very intentional. There's no cold calling involved. You only call when you have a reason. Can you unpack that a little bit for me? Like, how are you manufacturing reasons to call, or what are some of the things that lead you to reach out? So it's not just, I'm checking in, how was your weekend sort of interaction.
Yeah. So I think if you spend any time investigating any of the various like incredible people that are out there today talking to you about how to do this job well, those folks largely weren't around when I got started. And we also just didn't have what we have now with the internet and people really sharing ideas online. I'm so sorry, Connor. The logic train just jumped off the tracks there. Can you remind me of the question? And I'll just
the intentionality of follow-up. How are you creating these opportunities to reach out, or what are some of the things that?
Yeah. So for me, fundamentally, what it boils down to is I know it's very important for me to be in relatively constant contact with the people that feed me. Now, what I don't want to do is turn that into a very inauthentic, robotic thing. And I might get in trouble saying this. Our industry, I don't know who said this or who promoted this idea that Monday mornings are the time to call every realtor that you know, and even some that you don't, and ask them about a fun relationship. I think there's like a FROG acronym thing. I shouldn't poo-poo on that. If that works for you, that's great. That kind of thing just wouldn't really work for me. In order for me to pick up the phone and call a realtor, which is something I know that I need to be doing on a consistent basis, maybe this is too simple on some level, but I actually have a reason to call them. The reason is not, I need to shake a tree and get some business. Now, if that's a beneficial consequence of what I'm doing, that's great. And obviously I've got that in the back of my mind. You're kind of A-player realtors that you're actually doing business with. Even if all you have is, okay, I have one pre-approved client with this person, I'm going to call them and ask them, hey, have you talked to this guy? Are they out looking at anything this weekend? That's the most natural and straightforward, is if you have ongoing business with a realtor, that is your reason. You need to be on top of that business, on top of that client, working together with your referral partner to kind of work that deal. So that's very natural. If it's somebody that I'm pursuing, or maybe I don't have any active business with, or maybe I kind of look around and realize I haven't heard from so-and-so in a while. This lady hasn't sent me a deal in 6 months. And again, it's very authentic, but I will come up with a reason to call them. There's something useful for this person. And so a lot of times, and again, this is not very systematized at all, but let's say it's, I'm just going to make up a person here. Well, I know Beth works a lot with, new professors coming into the local university. Well, I happen to know something about, there's a special program that serves that community. I'm going to reach out to Beth and talk to her about it. Make sure that she's up to date on what's going on and be proactive with that information. And the good thing about this approach, just being very organic and authentic and only reaching out when you've got something really to say that's going to benefit them, the kind of beneficial knock-on cumulative effect that you get is that they take your calls. One thing I am never doing is calling up and saying, how's it going? What's up?
Right.
They've got enough friends.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure of it. They've got family, they got friends. The area that I'm useful in is my work. And if I have a work-related reason to reach out to this person, something that might help, that's when I'm making the contact. Right. And I'm trying to do that on a very consistent basis.
It's such a good call out. I mean, to call someone who, is a business relationship, not somebody that you're in a friendship with, or, that you've got that kind of camaraderie with, but to call them and just try to shoot the breeze, there's a good chance that when you called, they were in the middle of something important, or they've got something else on their mind. And so to call them with really nothing to offer, is now you're becoming kind of in the category of nuisance versus being, someone of value. And so I think that's a really good, point to make there.
Yeah.
Now you've when we talked kind of pre-show and some of that prep, another thing that you brought up was, because I always ask kind of what your setup is and how you're supported, and you mentioned that you had a dedicated assistant, but that kind of created a feeling of like a disconnect for you. Can you explain what you meant by that and kind of how that evolved?
Yeah. So I guess with the very heavy caveat, different strokes for different folks.
Sure. Yeah.
I have worked as a loan officer with about every permutation of ops structure you can possibly imagine. And the period that I'm talking about where I did have a dedicated assistant who she only worked for me, I'm truly writing her paycheck every month. It's coming directly out of my production. When I was operating that way, I can tell you a couple things. Number one, did it help my business? Like, absolutely. It absolutely helped my business. I was able to go out and shake trees much more effectively because the file work that I was doing on my individual transactions was relatively limited. I would have that initial phone call. I'm very old school. I still do most of my applications over the phone. I would do like the initial phone application. And then pretty much what I would do is just give that package to my dedicated assistant and she would just run with it. And she was great. She was very good at what she did. What I observed over time is that as I scaled up my business, I lost connection with my clients. And I lost my connection with my clients to such a degree that I became relatively convinced after the dust settled of the transaction that they would not remember me. Now, maybe that wasn't true. Maybe that's overstated. Maybe that is a worry that's just in my own mind. But I did not like the feeling that came with that. Now, what ended up happening in my career at that time is I decided to make my life super complicated. And I started a consumer direct mortgage operation called smartmortgage.com. I was working for a company called Cornerstone Mortgage at the time, which is a regional player in the St. Louis, Missouri market. It was since purchased by Guild Mortgage, who is my employer right now. So at around the time that I shifted away from my dedicated assistant, the seed had been planted in my mind that I felt this disconnection. I stopped originating to run this consumer direct mortgage operation for a time. I got to experience something that I actually would hope most loan officers do not get to experience this. I had to completely rebuild my business because I had not originated for a period. It was at least about 2 years where I really was not originating loans. And when I got back into originating loans, it really sat with me the observation that I had made about that loss of connection. Now, that was a very convenient thing for me to think about because I wasn't in a mode where I could afford a dedicated assistant. But I'll tell you this, what it gave me was total connection with my clients. I was their single point of contact from the beginning of the process when they're kicking around interest rate quotes to the very end and beyond. And I have to tell you, the connections that I developed with those clients, just bottom line, they are deeper connections than I have with any other clients.
Yeah, that's fantastic, man. And so when we're talking about borrowers and the clients that you've worked with, I mean, is there a story of a loan out there that just still sticks with you today?
Absolutely. Now, the woman I'm thinking about, let's say there are probably 20 cases that are similar directionally to the case I'm going to mention. But we'll call her Betty. She was in her late 70s and she lived in, I'll just be blunt, it was one of the worst apartments I've ever seen in my life. She had some difficulty managing her personal affairs, her belongings. The house was, the small apartment was stacked full of shoe boxes and plastic bags, and it was filthy and messy and dirty. And she was in a position where her landlord was selling the building and the building was going to get chopped up and turned into condos or something like that. Well, she called me in desperation. She wanted to meet. She wasn't able to drive. So the reason I know everything about her apartment is that that's where I went to meet her. And what she described to me on that initial phone call is that she talked to her bank and her bank told her basically in no uncertain terms, you make too little money to afford a mortgage, period, end of conversation. Now, what she told me was a very logical, common sense thing. Well, Mark, I'm paying $650 a month right now in rent. I got no problem doing that. I've maintained a perfect payment history where I'm at. And the bank is simply telling me that they don't care about that they cannot approve me for any level of payment because my income is too low. Now, this case, if you're a loan officer out there, I guarantee you're going to run into a ton of these cases. Don't trust the opinion of some other loan officer that's looked at a situation and said no, because this was a classic example. As soon as I met with her in her apartment and we started going over the basic numbers, what I picked up on is that she made about $1,400 a month in Social Security, and that's it. That's it. Now, if all I know about this person is that that is their only income, would I predict that they're going to maybe have a hard time qualifying for a mortgage? Sure. But as I went through her whole application, number one, she sat on a reasonably good pile of assets. She had about, $250,000, $300,000 in assets. She had no debt. And so all I did is a simple debt to income ratio calculation based on that Social Security. I'm like, well, I can absolutely approve you for the same level of payment that you're in right now. It translates into a home price of, $1,000 or whatever it was at the time. And we're in the St. Louis, Missouri market. If I say $90,000, there's some markets that are going to go, you can't even buy a cardboard box for that. 15 years ago in the St. Louis area, you could get a decent, cottage type house for that amount of money. And that's exactly what we did for her. It wasn't even a difficult loan. But had she listened to her bank, she would have ended up in another crappy rental somewhere. And all it took was just listening to her.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's the power of the local professional. When people align with people who care and that know the guidelines and know how to get the job done, it's, magic can happen. Home ownership is something that should be available to anybody who can do it. And so I think that's great that you were able to help her out.
Yeah. And I'll mention another thing too, because it's going to seem like I'm angry here all of a sudden because I'm thinking about this. There are so many younger loan officers, especially, and I've had a handful of coaching clients over the years that have come to me for some one-on-one. If I get a whiff of especially a newer loan officer, younger loan officer turning away business because they perceive it's too small of a loan, not only is that a violation of the federal law, which we should actually care about in our industry, it's also just stupid. Because is it a paycheck to get a $70,000 loan? Yeah, it's a paycheck. That's positive money going in your pocket. And if I hear you complaining about not making any money and yet you turned away a lower dollar deal because my hourly worth is what? No, it's not. No, it's not. You're a loan officer. And you should have the mindset of being out there for every single deal, every single person that you can help. And what do you know? It's those smaller deals for me. And I guarantee this is true. The smaller deals have been more rewarding for me over the years. That story with her, there's hundreds of stories like that or similar to that. And also, I got to tell you, the number of times that me being the guy that was willing to take on the challenging, the difficult, the lower end deal, the number of times where I've been that guy to take that low end deal and maybe not make a huge amount of money for my work, that has turned into, my son, who is an orthodontist, is buying a new mansion. That's happened more than once. Let's say that. Yeah. It's happened a lot.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I'll tack one thing onto that too, which is that loan is also your realtor's commission.
Yes.
And being able to take that on and be the person that shows up with yes and makes it happen, that's great for the agent too. So
absolutely.
And that leaves
yeah. Well, and make no mistake, this is like very old school advice. And I guess maybe you're seeing a theme here overall. Like I'm very old school in the way that I view this business. And I'm very thankful for all the new bells and whistles that we have, the things that make the process very efficient, et cetera. But the old school thing that will be true forever is that protecting your realtor's paycheck and making sure your realtor gets paid, that by definition entrenches your relationship with that realtor no matter what.
Yeah, great call. Great call out. Well, hey, as we wrap up, just on the topic of the future, what is, in your opinion, just advice that you could give to a loan officer today about just the next 3 years? Like, what are skills they should work on, or what are some things that they should really be focused on to be relevant for 3 years from now, and to just,
Yeah.
continue growing their business.
Yeah. It depends on where you're coming from. My basic advice is, in my perfect world where you're doing everything I'm telling you to do, we're not doing anything fancy with any special software or subscription service or marketing tool or flyer. We're not doing any of that until the hardcore fundamentals of your business practice are set. And if you're not getting the kind of business that you need right now, and you have not yet plugged in more hours of work, that's step 1, 2, 3, 4, and through 18 right there. What are you working? 8 hours a day? I doubt it. You're going on a long lunch. You're taking out that realtor that's already been sending you deals because it gives you something to do. Like, no, if you're not where you need to be, plug in more hours. If it's an 8-hour day you're doing right now, go to 10. If it's a 10-hour day, go to 12. There is no substitute for work. It will always yield you the most results. Now, if you've got that core stuff there, of course, there's all sorts of cool things you can do with the new stuff that's coming out. I'm very bullish on AI as it relates to allowing the loan officer to essentially replicate their marketing efforts. If you've got something useful to say, do a newsletter, do something, and definitely lean on those tools to help you create that kind of content that's going to give you stickiness with your clients, with your referral sources, et cetera. But by and large, I'll put it this way. I have been doing this long enough to know that loan officers are among the easiest people to sell to. If what is being sold is you can work less and make more money, we as loan officers apply almost no discretion to that. Where do I sign? How much is it? Resist all that. Again, if you're not plugging in the maximum amount of work, look there first.
Man, love it. Well, Mark, thanks for being on the lowdown. It was great having your story out there and just hearing this and having this conversation. I, of course, wish you nothing but the best in the future, and keep an eye on you, man. Thank you.
Thanks, Connor. I really appreciate the opportunity.
You bet.